Freedom Radio Hour. Live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Freedom Radio Hour. I'm your host, DJ Adam Cruz, and I have my fantastic co-host right here.
Eddie Nicholas, what up, beautiful people, and welcome to 91.6 FM, the Heartbeat of Sudan. We are so thrilled and glad that you chose to join us today. We have some wonderful news, music, information that we're going to share with you. So, Adam, let's start getting to the deep and the root of things. What's going on in the world of music news and all that good stuff?
I'm excited to see it because there's a lot to cover. First, let us take a moment and let our listeners and our viewers know that the Freedom Radio Hour is here, not only giving you fantastic music, but we're here to be your number one source for music, business news, and trends from around the globe. We're live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM and on the web at dwopmusicradio.com. First out the gate, I think it's time to take another trip. Pack your bags as we're going south. We're in the States here. We do our thing in the New Jersey, New York City area. And so now we're going south. We're going to Georgia. You see, Georgia has been really interesting in terms of the music business game. Why, do you ask? Well, many years ago, well, not that long ago, Georgia legislature passed a tax credit for film production houses. They realized that film production houses, TV outfits and such, were moving out of the state and they were going elsewhere. Why? Because it was too expensive. So to attract those film production houses back to the state and then some, they introduced a tax credit. And so by doing so, it did in fact work, and it brought many of the film production houses back. Now they are listed as number 3 in terms of the destinations for film production houses in terms of the tax credits that you
And
get.
you can think Real Housewives of Atlanta, Love and Hip Hop, and all
that stuff's in Georgia.
All of that stuff is in Atlanta, and a lot of, matter of fact, I recently saw a film that is based in Atlanta. It's so many that I think it had Teresa Griffin in it.
Oh.
So, you know, these stories and these places are just blossoming all over the place. I remember one time they were trying to do film and television production read in the Richmond area, Petersburg, Virginia.
Okay.
So, you know, these places pop up, but now Atlanta is the number 1, and that's a series.
Number 3.
Number 3. Oh,
Yes.
I was going to say number 1, but they're working on it.
Yes, they are.
But you see so many of the musical artists there. Anybody that is anyone in any name worthy, Tyler Perry, you know, all of those companies.
Go back to L.A. Reid, and they started their whole headquarters. That LaFace was all started in Atlanta. You know, TLC, all those groups came out of that. Anyhow, yes. So Georgia, wanting to continue in this progressive on this progressive tip, they thought about maybe we can apply this to the music business and see if we can attract. So very recently, what they decided to do was to introduce 2 different bills that do 2 separate things. First thing is House Bill 155, and it passed. House 155, in essence, grants a 15% credit for like live musical outfits. Think musical theater in Georgia, right? If you spend more than $500,000 in a calendar year, then you can write off 15% of that on your taxes. So that's what they're offering for that.
So just for clarity, when you talk about $500,000, you talk about $500,000 in creating your product in the state of Georgia.
Correct. So this
Okay.
is not to be applied in other states. Very good point. Just if you're a Georgia resident or if you're doing production in Georgia, then you are entitled to this 15% tax credit, according to House Bill 155, which did in fact pass. They also introduced in this 155 a credit, a similar 15% credit for music outfits. That's independent music labels that spend more than $100,000 a year or more. You too are entitled to a similar credit. I'm not exactly sure if it's 15% or 10%, but either way, they're hoping that applying this kind of tax credit to the music business companies to entice them to do their production, it'll help, you know. And truth's in the pudding. It worked on the TV outfit, so it stands to reason that perhaps it might work in music. I do find it interesting, though, as a quick point, that in this instance, they have this barometer set with 100,000, but I laugh because we are small record label owners, and I don't spend $100,000 a year on expenses for the label. So I don't see smaller outfits like mine ever benefiting from that if that were to be adopted, say, in the state that I live, because it doesn't, it sort of it raises the bar. So you have to be a certain status to even qualify for the tax credit.
For the tax credit.
Because think many of us are like, smaller outfits of me, myself and another or something like that.
And if we see $1,000 within a year,
we're excited.
We're excited.
So can you imagine? You're like spending $100,000. I'm not spending that in no way. So, but this obviously tax credit is not for you nor I if we're talking in that realm. But this obviously will work and attract larger outfits, larger record labels, larger independent music
corporations
and publishers alike that want to do business in Georgia. It will definitely be attractive. It's worked. So let's see if it applies on a music tip. But while we're down in the South in Georgia, it got me to thinking way back in time over jazz and how that circuit that was happening in jazz.
The chicken circuit.
What do you call it?
The chicken circuit.
The chitlin circuit.
The chitlin circuit. The chicken circuit. All of that.
So so let's take a break. When we come back, let's break down some of the jazz history and talk about what that means for royalties back then and what you can learn about it for today. And then we're going to tie it in with our Eddie, our co-host here, who took a visit to the African American Museum.
The National African American Museum of History and Culture.
I'm going to ask him to repeat that. Let's take a break. We'll come right back on the Freedom Radio Hour.
91.6 FM.
And at dwildmusicradio.com.
That is a mouthful.
Freedom Radio Hour. Live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM.
What up, beautiful people, and welcome back. My name is Eddie Nicholas, and we're so glad that you have chose to join us once again on 91.6 FM, the Heartbeat of Sudan. I'm sitting up here with my partner, Mr.
Adam Cruz, and you're deep in the zone right here on the Freedom Radio Hour. We're your number one source for music, business, news, and trends from around the globe. As he said, we're live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM and on the web at dwildmusicradio.com. Well, let's talk about it. You took recently a trip to Washington, D.C., our nation's capital.
I most certainly did.
If you're in the States, make it your business to go down to the nation's capital. There's a lot to see, including a much sought-after ticket for the new opening of this African American Museum. And my brother is quick to correct me. What is the proper name of said museum?
Ooh, let me get it right.
Yes.
Oh.
I'm laughing already. Go ahead.
The National African American Museum of Culture and History and Culture. I know I done messed it up already.
It's all right. But I love that you went down there. It is. If you're in the States right now, because it just opened not but a few months ago, that there are tickets. Very sought after tickets now to go see the exhibits that are contained within the museum. So first out of the gate, for those that haven't had a chance to go, including me, what was it like to go?
Oh, it was wonderful.
I know the day started like at 6 a.m. or something.
We had to be up at 6:30 a.m. just to catch the bus down, and we had a 10:45 arrival and an 11:45 entrance to the museum. The museum is free.
Oh, okay.
However, if you go down in groups, they want you to make accommodations where you book the time and you come in as a group.
I see.
As far
and
as
you came in a group.
I came in a group. Now,
okay.
as far as individuals, they do have times for that where you can just show up and based on the number of people that they have in attendance, you can just go and do what you have to do and go into the museum. The museum is
it large or small?
Oh, it's large. It's 5 levels.
Oh, wow.
Starting on the top floor, cultural expressions, then you move down and you enter into the final floor, which is the Rubenstein collection and museum.
Wow.
And there you learn the history from slavery through modern times. One of the things
is like the Helena Rubinstein Foundation. Is that
Foundation? Yes,
but
they have a whole section. I mean, it's museums contained in museums.
Wow, sounds great. So, were you able? Because sometimes if you go to a museum, you're like actually not able to see everything because it's so massive. Is that the case here?
Not with me. What I did, I took liberty and I tried to see as much as I could. So I spent spent like about an hour 45 minutes on each floor.
Right.
What takes up a lot of time with people is when they start reading. The visual is there, but when you take the time to read the information, that's why people want to go back, because the museum can be done in one day, but if you really want to get the soaking of the information that is presented to you in the literature part of it, you're going to go back and you're going to want to read and follow up.
Right.
The one thing about the museum, and I saw a lot of parents with their kids, I'm of a time where I lived a lot of that stuff. I was born in the 60s, so I lived a lot of that stuff of what we see, and I was taught a lot of that stuff because my parents were very big on African American culture. So we had the Black history books, the American Negro History Encyclopedia.
Sure.
So we had all of those things. And one of the things that I was really interested in, it ties back in with us, was when we were back there, we talked about the history of music.
Yes.
And one of the things that I did see, they did have an honor and a tribute to Frankie Knuckles.
I love
which
that.
I thought was amazing, considering you're surrounded by folks like James Brown, Duke Ellington, U.B. Blake, Billie Holiday, Eartha Kitt.
Wow,
I mean,
so amazing.
you come in here and you see all the nuances of the richness of Black art, and not only that, but the cross-pollination of Hispanic and Blacks in music. They had a fabulous tribute for the one and only Miss Celia Cruz.
Oh, they did?
Yes, they had her dress.
That's
They
so
made
great
mention
to
of her
know.
name. So it also shows the cross-culturalism that we do as it plays with music and in music. The mothership.
Right, yeah. I'm so fascinated because I was hoping that they would. I love hearing that they had a mention for Celia Cruz, but also I was really interested to know if any of the music business was going to be Sean, because it's easy to say here are our greats, and James Brown and others, of course, mention that, but I think it's also important because we're going to put our music business hats on and ask other questions. Like I remember as we're down in Georgia talking about House Bill 155, House Bill 196, and we go back talk about the Chitlin circuit and the history of music, especially around jazz music. It was amazing that in the 40s. These jazz musicians were often paid like a one-time fee, or oftentimes they weren't even given the money themselves.
Please.
It was the band leader that would be given this one-time fee, or even sometimes a band leader negotiated with the label some sort of royalty
And everyone
agreement.
else was paid out.
Nobody was paid out royalties. They were paid out just this one-time fee. So if you could imagine, the other thing that was very unfortunate is this idea of infusing drugs as a payment for royalties. In lieu of payment, they would offer these musicians, these touring musicians, drugs instead of payment. And I wonder if, as unfortunate as the history is, if the museums are able to go deeper about these particular items.
I think with that, from all the information that I saw, it was more visual, and they gave you a touchstone. But that touchstone instilled enough in one to want to go out and search up more information. Because
So let's take a break. When we come back, I want to ask you more about this. This is an important topic. We'll come back on the Freedom Radio Hour, your number one source for music business news and trends from around the globe.
91.6 FM.
Freedom Radio Hour.
And we're back live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM, the Heartbeat of Sudan, and on the web at dwopmusicradio.com. You're deep in the zone right here on the Freedom Radio Hour, your number one source for music, business news, and trends from around the globe. I'm with my co-host,
Mr. Eddie Nicholas. And, earlier we were discussing the music scene, the jazz scene,
Yes.
and you had made mention of the 40s, but we need to go back, prior to all of that.
Okay.
We need like the early 1900s.
Okay.
When you had the people playing the piano and all of that type of stuff. Louis Armstrong, the people that played the leaf. What's my musician's name? Ragtime.
Yes.
You used to play the ragtime. So music goes back way beyond just the 40s when it comes to the drugs, because drugs were always prevalent. If it wasn't drugs, it was alcohol.
That's funny. Hold that thought. You made a very good point here, because in a recent interview that I researched, one of the jazz greats, Gary Bartz, talked about his long struggles with drug abuse, and he talked about the loose nature of open drug use amongst these jazz communities. And he says as horrible as the use was, there was the only bright spot that as a musician who relied on improvisation, the drugs slowed things down, so you had this sense of being able to catch everything,
the nuance,
so you could deliver the best sort of work, even though it was a delusion in the drug haze. But he's like, and so you're afflicted and addicted, so you're getting some reprieve out of that.
And and many people claim that it's the creative source and nuance.
But when you're talking about artists that were paid instead of royalties that were due them, they were paid in drugs. Billie Holiday suffered terribly.
Billie Holiday wasted her money because she chose to buy drugs. And see, that's the difference.
Yes.
Everything that people do is a choice.
Miles Davis.
And the one thing that many people do not do, we get so caught up with getting the money that we don't learn the business. And the money allows you to purchase the drugs that you think give you the creative process. We look at such artists as Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin. All of these people died from their abuse of drugs. And even today, when you look at Michael Jackson and Prince, they were prescription, but there was still an abuse.
And the other thing too is that it's like often those that are afflicted in that haze, they talk about not being able to think of anything else other than the next score. But you think that in these times when they're heavy in the use of drugs, that they would do things like set up their will or make sure their agreements are good are in place. Like Prince, from his death, we've learned that he too, someone that you would think would be so on top of his finances and affairs, because he was such a champion for fair sharing of the proceeds regarding royalties and streaming. He was really ahead of his time. But he too struggled with his own mismanagement of funds and establishing his own affairs.
Because and same with Michael Jackson, you get so many millions and millions of dollars. Again, who is tracking your money?
Right.
And then if you hire someone, you have to make sure that you hire someone that is in tune, but like trustworthy. And like Miss Oprah says, if you are the one in charge, you make sure that at the end of the day, you are the one signing the checks.
So
we look at such artists as Tony, and these are modern day 20th century, 21st century artists. Tony Braxton, look at all the financial issues that she had gotten into. And money and finances and trouble has never been a distant thing for musicians. It has always been there, because there was a time when you were a working artist, you basically sold your work to either get money or to get those drugs.
Right.
So it was a matter of the choices that one made for that fate.
And also transitioning into just being more on top of your agreements. If you're an artist, a producer, a songwriter, someone who's going to be interacting with agreements, part of this session of why we're talking about this is so that you understand, okay, perhaps you might not be drug afflicted or what have you, or accepting doing something underhanded in some way. However,
shady deals.
Yeah, it's important to know that if you are doing anything, you review your agreements, know what you're signing, know that you are what you're expected in terms of payment comes at you the way it does, as opposed to somebody offering you something else in lieu of payment. So those things still apply today, because to Eddie's very point, when we go down to Georgia and we talk about what they're trying to do to bring back film production houses, they too have had their history of groups that have come out of there penniless. Look at TLC. They come straight out of Atlanta, out of L.A. Reid Babyface Camp, and they, through their own contractual mismanagement, etc., had to deal with bankruptcy. So the takeaway here, and when we talk about the museum and all of that,
and let's not forget, we could even throw they just did the television show New Edition.
Yes, and all of the yes, that's a great point. All of that thing is bringing up the point over and over again that if we're not going to learn the lessons around managing our affairs and our agreements, we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes from our ancestors. We
and
have
then
a museum that tells you that story. So let's not repeat our mistakes. Let's learn from our greats. We can sit here and pay homage to James Brown and Celia Cruz and others, but we have to learn that they did that and they struggled through their own mismanagement so that we could learn.
And not only their own mismanagement, their own addictions. whatever adversity,
etc.
and then we also have to look back when you're talking about the early part of the century and blacks and musicians, the racial prejudice that they had to go through. So you had the racial prejudice, you had the drugs, you had the mismanagement, and you had people not knowing their own business.
Right.
So
all of that is the perfect storm for bankruptcy, for having no clue where your affairs are, where your money is, etc. So take that advice. Make sure that if anything's unfinished in your life or in your work, whether it's an unsigned agreement, maybe you need to follow up on something and complete a task you started. Take the time to do that. Let this be your call to action. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning into the Freedom Radio Hour. Definitely check out EddieNicholas.com, DJAdamCruz.com, and of course FreedomRadioHour.com. Post a comment under everything we're posting. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you want some topics that you'd like to see us discuss, reach out.
Yes, because there's a lot to discuss. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great weekend and a great week ahead. I'll see you next time. We'll see you next time.
Peace and love. 91.6 FM.
And D-Wop Music Radio.